My wife, Amy, she sends me from time to time articles that are flashing on her Facebook page. I'm rarely, if at all, on Facebook. So we have this kind of a tacit agreement between us that if any one of us comes across a great article that we know that the other would want to read, we always email it to each other. And that was really a powerful article. I read it just a couple days ago that spoke of something that we as a community worked on together during the high holidays, 2 high holidays ago. Wrestling, facing our fears. Now, fear, whether we dare to acknowledge or not, is a major driver in overwhelmingly most of the decisions we make in life on a day-to-day basis. I mean, think about for a moment of all the thing in your life every day that you try to avoid. Think about all the things in your life that you're trying to protect yourself from. Think about all the times you brace yourself not to repeat the mistakes you've already made. And think about all the things you do during the day that would fall under one of those 3 categories. And I only named 3, but there's many other different ways that fear manifests into our lives. Overwhelmingly, most of what we do, whether we like it or not, comes from fear. And fear shows up in a way that, when we want to control the moment, when we want to control the interaction, when we want to control that experience, when we want to control the other, when we want to contain whatever is coming at us. That is how fear manifests, and that makes us miserable. And the problem is that fear is also connected to the good things that happen to us in life. A joyful moment, an expression of love towards us. And immediately, the voice of fear comes up from wherever it comes up and says, oh, you got to hold on to this. You got to protect this. You have to contain this. You have to make sure it continues. You have to make sure it lasts. You have to make sure it doesn't dissipate. Hold on to it. Control it. And that's when it leaves. By the moment we're trying to control even our good experiences, moment of fear stepping into even those good experiences, we make ourselves miserable. We can't win. We can't win. Now, fear is deeply connected to our spiritual process, our spiritual journey. Now, one might think that we measure our spiritual growth, our spiritual maturation, our spiritual evolution based on, believe it or not, it's actually not based on, believe it or not, whether or how long we can sit quietly on the meditation cushion like a statue, unmovable and quiet. That is not how we measure spiritual maturation or growth. The way we measure spiritual evolution, spiritual maturation, spiritual growth is actually by how much fear drops in our lives. That's how we measure it. That's how we know. And it's interesting that this article and this connection was made this week because, like I said at the beginning, we are moving towards Passover. And the holiday of Passover is all about fear. Because fear is ultimately our greatest Mitzrayim, our greatest Egypt, our greatest enslavement. Fear is what prevents us from moving beyond the old ways of thinking that we hold on to. Fear is what keeps us from transforming, from transcending those limited, narrow beliefs, ideas, perceptions that we have that we are so afraid of letting go because they define us. And we are unable to move beyond the self that we are today because fear keeps us there. Fear is what keeps us stuck. Fear is what closes our heart. Fear is what causes us to reject, to exclude. Fear is what stops us from transforming to a place where we would be more inclusive, more embracing, where we would be able to see more, where our worldview would include more perspectives from others, other people's views on the world, that we could take on and see the world through more pairs of shoes, if you'd like, through many more pairs of eyes. Fear is what keeps us behind the walls that says, I am right, this is my truth, and this is the world as it is and as I have defined it. Fear in the story of Passover is embodied by the character of Pharaoh. Pharaoh is fear. In fact, when Pharaoh first shows up in the story of the Exodus book 1, chapter 1, almost verse 1, Pharaoh defines Pharaoh's self as a fearful self. The first thing Pharaoh says is, look at how many of those Hebrews are. They are going to overthrow me. They are going to take over the land. You know, all these immigrants that are multiplying. Chain migration from Canaan. They're bringing the whole mishpucha. Pharaoh starts with fear. And that fear leads us to enslave his own people, the very nation underneath him, to keep control over them, to contain them, to park them. Pharaoh is also the image, as the 10 plagues unfold, of that whose heart gets hardened time after time after time. Even when those parts of self that yearn to be free, because the story is about us, those parts of self that finally try to break free, Pharaoh runs after them and tries to kill them. That voice of fear within us, the Pharaoh within us, always tries to kill the voice of freedom that is yearning to break free from under the thumb of the tyranny of the fear of Pharaoh. Which brings me to the article. Because I had no other way to segue back to the article. So I was just going to say, which brings me to the article. It's a great article. It's based on a research of scientists that took place in Yale. And the header of the article is, "We found the way to turn conservatives into liberals and vice versa." Fascinating article. What they did, and you know how they did it because, the whole leading up to this was about fear. So I gave you the answer before I told you about the article. But really what they did is that they either raised the level of fear or diminished the level of fear, and watch how people changed based on that. So they gave people, there were about 300 people who participated in the research. They gave them scenarios, very intense scenarios, where they had to really feel themselves as if they were part of the story unfolding. And then they asked questions that were connected to political views or social views. and rated whether they were leaning conservative or orthodox, or that's the rabbi talking, conservative or liberal, right? And they declared themselves to be either Republicans or Democrats before the survey started, so they had a good sample of each. And I'm not going to go through the whole article, we don't have time tonight, but one of the scenarios they gave them, especially they gave to the conservatives, to the Republican, was imagine that you have one of the best superpowers that you can have, which is you are completely invulnerable. Nothing can touch you. You are forever going to be healthy. You're always going to be okay. Nothing can happen to you. And they move them and they walk them through a whole scenario of them having that superpower and interacting with whatever the story was. I'm making it short. And then they ask them the questions that were politically or socially relevant. And their answers were all as if they had actually suddenly become liberals. They literally answered as if they were Democrats. Now they did the opposite with the liberals and the Democrats, and they make them Republicans, because they raised the level of fear in the scenario they invited them into, and therefore their answers to the questions looked like or felt like they were conservatives. Which shows that despite our thinking that we are rational beings, that we really weigh the pros and the cons of every candidate, that we really look at the in-depth policy, most of us overwhelmingly, and even us, make political decisions or lean one way or another because of our fear or lack thereof. Now, I'm no politician, I don't even play one on TV, but my work is in the spiritual realm. And my work is, I believe, at least I like to think so, about supporting each other, supporting and including myself, supporting each other in the evolution of our consciousness, the evolution of awareness. And it is absolutely clear to me that one of the key aspects of our ability to evolve and to grow is by diminishing fear in our life. Fear is the key element that we have to wrestle with, that we have to face, that we have to befriend. And it works on multiple levels. It works on an inner, personal, individual level, but it also works in the outer world level. On the inner, personal, individual level, I am one of the fiercest proponents of the practice of meditation. Because I strongly believe from my personal experience that the practice of meditation is a technique. It's just a technique that helps us, and there are others, but that one helps us create spaciousness between us and our emotions, between us and our thoughts. Create this space where we are no longer reactive, we are no longer owned, we are no longer enslaved by our emotions, no longer enslaved by our thoughts, where we actually can stand in a space of equanimity and balance and watch the thoughts arising and the emotions arising and decide not to react to them, to just remain equanimous in their presence. And so those words, those thoughts, and those emotions that are bringing fear to us can be breezed through, can be held in compassion and understanding, and don't have to be acted upon. So it transforms us into beings that are more grounded, more compassionate, into beings that are less fearful, less reactive. Not that we are not reactive. I use the word less because that's key. As long as we are in the body, there is a part of us that has an ego, and that ego will get triggered however many hours of meditation you have, even after you are enlightened. Even after you are enlightened. Because we are conditioned beings. On the other side of that, on the outer world, we also have to work on alleviating or diminishing the fear that we see in each other. And it seems to me, and I may be wrong, but it seems to me that as human beings in general, there's really two things that are bringing up the most fear in us. One is the fear of poverty. Two is the fear of illness. Connected to the fear of poverty could be a fear of hunger, of abandonment, of homelessness. And the fear of illness is also connecting us to the fear of death, also to the fear of abandonment, whatever those are. But umbrella-wise, we could really see that poverty and illness are two drivers of our fear. And so there are ways that you and I can really work to impact the world to help diminish this fear so that we can usher in a transformation, that we can usher in the moving into a higher state of consciousness globally, worldwide. In our nation, in America, there's a couple things that I've been thinking about and gravitating towards, and they're not just the two things that we could do. There's 1,000 things each of us could do from whatever perspective we have to work towards that. One, for me, that is very alive right now is universal basic income. To create a floor for our citizens, to create a floor below which nobody can fall. That no one could ever be falling into poverty ever again. That no one could ever fall into homelessness ever again. That everybody would have a minimum to be sustained. And that's just one idea, and I know many people are working on many other different kinds of ideas, but that's one that's close to my heart, one that I'm working on right now. The other one is universal healthcare. Universal healthcare would be one of the ways that we could ensure that no one is not covered by free healthcare. I come from a country in France where healthcare is pretty much free. And that makes a big difference in people's lives. Then you can really concentrate on doing other things in your life than just worry on avoiding poverty or making sure you're never going to fall ill because you're not covered. And the two are connected, obviously. So this is what we can do. And to me, this is how spirituality enters the practical, Because if you work on one, you have to work on the others. You're going to work on your individual self, but you also have to work in the social context in which you live, and you also have to work in impacting the system of which we are a part. You can't just ignore one of the three. Because if you only think about yourself, if you only think about your meditation and your equanimity and making sure your personal growth is what matters most, and you ignore the social context and you ignore the systemic damage that is going on around you, at some point it's going to come and catch up with you because you still live in this world. And this world, if it's not evolving with you, will pull you down and will stop and stop your growth. On the other side, if you only worry about the social context or the political systemic context and don't nurture your inner being, then you won't actually be able to rise to the place in consciousness from which you can vision the society, the world that you seek to see manifesting in your lifetime. So you have to work on all three aspects of reality. You can't have spirituality devoid of action. They go together. They're one. They're interconnected. They inter-are. They infuse each other. They strengthen each other. So tomorrow when you meet the next obstacle that is in front of the world or the being you want to be, the world you want to see. What is the obstacle that prevents you from finally sitting on the meditation cushion and just take 5 minutes to be in silence with yourself and your breath? Or whether it is that beep at work, right, that feels like he or she is in your way. Or whether it is this whatever piece of legislation, whether it is the way the traffic is moving, whatever it is, whatever obstacle is there. Look at the fear inside of it. What is the fear that is animating that obstacle in your life? What is the fear that maybe is coming from, quote unquote, the other side, that is driving the other side to act in the way they are acting? What is the fear at the core of your reactivity? And just be present to that. Hold that in awareness. Because before we can address any quote-unquote evils in the world, whatever that means to us, we have to first address the fear that is at the source of it. May we all find a pathway in our life to diminish, and even with persistence and practice, to even eradicate the fear within us. And we all worked together to diminish and as best we can come close to eradicating fear in our world. Ken Yehi Ratzon. Amen.